Everybody should be taking notes because we're going to talk about this right at the end.
We're very proud to stand for a motion which is about ending the ridiculous fetishization within our society of a very middle class pursuit. It's something which we value far beyond any economic benefit that it has to our society, and a case where we invest in something beyond any reasonable principle of how we typically choose to invest in the things that we value. We think this investment is actively wasteful of billions of dollars worth of resources, particularly in the developed world. We also think it actively disadvantages the poor and those who are not particularly interested in pursuing tertiary education. On this side of the house, our model is very simple. We will remove all government subsidies directed towards the funding of students in graduate or postgraduate tertiary education. We think this will include things like student loan schemes where people are able to borrow money from the government. We think this debate is not about the funding of research done by private tertiary institutions. We're happy to stand for that to continue in some capacity. What am I going to talk about? Firstly, I'm going to talk to you about what the tertiary sector will look like under our model and how people can still access funding to get a tertiary education if they so desire. I'm going to tell you secondly about the market incentives under our model and why we think that this current policy is actively wasteful. Thirdly, I'm going to tell you about signalling, I'll take you very soon, Gemma, and how we think this actively disincentivizes people who actively harms people who choose not to get tertiary education.
So at best, in your world, only the most intelligent and most meritorious poor students will be able to get scholarships. What about those who don't manage to overcome the educational disadvantage they face all the way through the educational system?
Well, what you do to them, Gemma, is you take trillions of dollars from government taxes and funnel it into Oxford and Yale and Harvard and Cambridge and all of these public institutions which are only accessible to the rich. So you're the team that's actually distributing this to those sorts of people. So firstly, let's talk about access. We think fundamentally tertiary education is simply an investment which pays off in the long run, but which you have to pay a short-run cost in terms of doing that. And we think there's no fundamental reason why, if that is a good investment, the market isn't capable of investing in that, right? Like private companies invest in forestry, for example, which often takes 50 or 60-year investments to mature. So we think the market is perfectly capable of that. We support models like you see in the United States, where banks are lending people money in order to a contract to take a proportion of their income. In the long run, we're quite happy to say that banks can lend money in traditional loan-style arrangements, ladies and gentlemen, and we think that the guarantee for this is the fact that people are getting an education, exactly the same guarantee upon the basis that the government lends money to these people. We want to say, secondly, though, that we think that tertiary education is not currently free. It is only currently free insofar as the government is spending these resources. We think we can afford substantial tax cuts as a result of this policy, and we think we can redistribute that money in a far more progressive way than the current tertiary education system does. So insofar as your concern is that poor people get a raw deal out of this model, we think they actually do a lot better, right? So we think that scholarships will still exist, and we think that they exist as a result of the sort of endowments that these universities already have, and that will continue to get up these scholarships. So no reason why, if you show promise and you're going to be able to convert this tertiary education into a long-run income boost, you won't be able to get funding under our model. Let's talk about the market incentives, because we say there are very few, if any, positive externalities, which is where we typically invest government money in terms of this tertiary education. We think on a basic human capital model of education, where people invest in their education in order to improve their long-run income, say they become lawyers or doctors or engineers, it already makes perfect sense to borrow that money to invest in your education, right? Or to get that money under some other arrangement, right? We think that people capture the full private benefit of their tertiary education simply by earning a wage or charging for their services in the long run. That's why doctors and engineers and lawyers earn so much. So there's no reason to say up and above that, we're going to top that up and make you invest lots and lots more than you otherwise would. We say secondly, people often take tertiary education purely for their own enjoyment, right? Because it's so cheap, you can learn French at university, you can take that classics class, you can take that field trip to to Southeast Asia, right? And we say that's a massively inefficient investment in someone's hobby when there's no reason to prefer that hobby over other hobbies. And it massively disadvantages people who don't necessarily have access to learning about those sort of wacky art subjects because they weren't born into the sort of family that necessarily value those sort of subjects. Secondly, we say though that you are actively distorting market incentives insofar as you are pressuring people who would not otherwise benefit from this to get a tertiary education, because that becomes the expectation when everyone else is doing it. We say that if you are not the sort of person who would benefit because it's just not the thing for you, you often will invest years of your life and take out loans which you can't afford to pay back because you don't complete that degree because university is somewhat competitive. And we don't think those people should be pursuing that education, but they do that under their model. Finally, we say in terms of redistributionary value, this is massively regressive for two reasons. Firstly, we say because there's always going to be an advantage coming from a rich family in the secondary education sector, right? Because you can send your children to better public schools and private schools. And those are the people who get far better access to the sorts of ridiculous amounts of money we're pumping in, paying them to become doctors, paying them to become lawyers, where they already get that money. Secondly, we say it's necessarily going to lead to higher future income, right? So you're paying people to become doctors, which they are then already compensated for by those higher wages, right? So you're paying people who in the future are going to become rich to be rich, and we say that's problematic. Second point then is about the signalling to effects of inflation. Because what we say is that you get massive harms when people are expected to get this tertiary education. And that's because when you hire as an employer a labourer, you can't just learn the full amount about them from their CV. You have to actually expect something about them as a result of what their life experiences are. And tertiary education is seen as a key signal of that life experience because it shows you're intelligent, it shows you're hardworking, and it shows you're willing to conform to the system. But that's actually really problematic because that signalling value gets diluted as lots and lots more people get tertiary education. What does that mean? It means degree inflation. It means previously where you only required a bachelor's degree for a job, you now need a master's degree, even if that doesn't add more skill, just because everyone's expected to have a master's degree. That is massively wasteful. But even more harmfully, what does it say about the 20% of people in these societies who aren't getting that degree? It suggests you're lazy. It suggests you're the laziest 20% of society. That's a very harmful signal to send because it means that those people struggle to get those jobs. Mr. Speaker, at best, this was just a wasteful investment, but at worst, it is actively redistributing money towards those already wealthy, it's actively harming those who choose not to pursue it. Very proud to propose.
Things that going to the university traps you within the income because somehow when you learn things like accounting, when you interact with people of different social diverse groups, you're not going to be able to break out of the social, the vicious cycle of poverty because somehow those things are not important in terms of aspirational abilities where you think of being able to make more money or being able to contribute to society in many different ways beyond just being able to make and milk money off people. We think that there is immense value in an individual being able to participate in things like research, being able to further the identities of the individual to things like literature and history, and those are important things, not just to the economy in of itself, but it's important to people in terms of their social belonging. And we think we're very proud to stand and fund those methods of belonging, and we think that Nick should reconsider if middle income people are then the only means of furthering its objectives, because we think everyone should have those equal access to be a part of that social progress. But more than that, his idea is that university fundings or billions of dollars just spent on Oxford, Harvard, Yale. Probably it's because he comes from a pretty prestigious university.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, a lot of funding goes into community colleges, right? To be able to give people opportunities even on the lower ground. To the extent Nick could then concede the debate then, because if this money goes into giving more opportunities for people to gain access to higher level of learning through tertiary education, regardless of the brand of the university, then they ought to send some money into this area. Because this money isn't just going to transform people into just teachers or philosophers. They're going to transform people into investment bankers, into lawyers, into doctors, into people who can make a lot more money than a middle income stigma that is trying to place on them. No, thank you. But he thinks that, well, at the end of the day, the investment of education is one that's very risky, and therefore we shouldn't allow governments to take on that risk, but allow corporations to do that. Because if you're able to show a track record of being able to repay those debts, or being able to be a fruitful human being, but in the eyes of corporations, they were very happy for corporations to take on those risks. Well, we are pretty damn sorry that he thinks this way. Why so? Because, well, we think that a lot of parts of the beneficial aspects of education are not profitable in nature, right? We're talking about things like the liberal arts, like history, being able to shape how society thinks, how society thinks of values that are conservative in nature, how we think that homosexuality is not something that we frown upon, something that we celebrate, right? And these are things that we can't place a price tag on, and the corporations can't do that as well. If you want feminist groups to go out there and pay for all these services, we're very glad for government to see the social benefits of that, to be able to be the ones who start this habit of actually paying for people to look into these methods, right? But then his idea here is a lot of people will end up spending a lot of money, and then they'll be trapped in debts because they're unable to pay off those debts, and therefore we should allow people who think they're more secure in being able to pay off those debts to be engaged in those education. Well, that's pretty sad, because his conception is therefore only the rich people who have tons of connection, who've got doctors and lawyers as their parents, are then able to access those things. But people who we think are risky because you've never shown an ability to be rich in society don't get access to those things. Why is that a problem? Because we think that every single person who qualifies for university has already shown the potential to be able to contribute and do well in examinations to succeed in life in general. Even if they don't immediately succeed in life, we think the rational thinking, the critical process that is brought through them to the university education is going to push them to a point where they will become contributing, fruitful members of society. So we're very happy to take on those risks because it's a bloody high percentage that they will succeed. And we think governments ought to be able to give people that benefit as well. No, thank you. So we think that it's an absolute lie that education becomes a premium, because suddenly if an entire society becomes more obsessed with say MBAs and BBAs, that's a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. That just means that everybody is a lot more smart and intellectual and educated. And why is that a bad thing? Just because you no longer feel exclusively educated doesn't mean that everybody should benefit, right? And we think the increased competitiveness is good for everybody to benefit from it. No, thank you. Why is there the obligation of the state to do this? Because we think that the state ought to be able to empower people with different opportunities, to maximize their ability to contribute to the society and the economy at large. And we think that in particular, to be able to look out for those who are disadvantaged. Why so? Because we think that large part of the state's inability to take care of this individual means that the state was vicariously liable for forcing poverty among these people. Things like mismanagement of the economy, things like not being able to provide for people when they engage in urbanization or poor immigration policies. And we think those are things that lock people in poverty, that people need an avenue to break out of the poverty cycle. And we think if subsidies is a way to go, we will very well support it. But more than that, we think that it's also about the ability to eradicate poverty by social mobility, and education, specifically tertiary education, is the means to do so. No, thank you. But why is it then the ability for the poor to break out of the poverty cycle and increase mobility? Because we think, one, it empowers them to engage in a higher level of economic activities. When they're into things like banking laws, like financial markets, we think that it's in and of itself, in terms of the income they receive, allows them to break out of it, allows them to break out of the minimum wage that they're somehow assumed to be supposed to get for the rest of their life. Right?
So, if, as you say, it's such a high percentage of people who benefit from this education, why won't banks be prepared to take those risks with large amounts of people as they do with mortgages? Because not everyone pays their mortgage.
Because banks have different emphasis and governments care about things that are not profit-making in nature. And even if they are profit-making in nature, banks have a limited capacity to be able to feed the education of so many people, right? So we think if the government has greater financial largesse to feed more people and allow them to empower themselves, we think we shouldn't rely on some corporations with some selfish agendas of theirs. No, thank you. So second idea, right? We think that another important element, specifically for the poor, is the ability for them to develop things like innovation and like transferable skills that do not become obsolete over time. We think that as society progresses, there are a lot of things that change, right? One is demand changes. Two is the idea that technology can replace a lot of agrarian skills that you have, or the fact that we now move into resource dependent, we move away from resource dependent industries, and therefore a lot of different skills are then required. When you go to university, the aspects of critical thinking, or being able to connect with other individuals, are then able to transfer from industry to industry, and thereby not locking them even if society progresses beyond the skills they have now. But the third reason is because we think there's a huge signaling effect to be able to entice people to take up university, to be able to commit themselves to the process towards the university, because they think that poor people can make it as well. We think that if you're generally putting more effort during your daily secondary school and the pre-tertiary education, we think that even if you don't make it at the end of the day, we think you're going to be a better member of society. But the last thing really is because these people eventually take up positions of power, and when they become politicians, when they become people who are financially empowered, we think that they'll directly give back to the community they came from. Where we're talking about the blacks who are successful, who come back to be teachers, to be able to set up charities, to be able to start up schools, to give back and directly empower the communities of poor people that they came from. And oftentimes these are ethnic minority groups that are also left out by the government. So there is a natural process in which there's sustainable development from these empowered individuals back to the communities, and we think tertiary education is the way to go, and therefore governments ought to pour billions of dollars into it. Thank you.
Poor people don't need to learn literature, because poor people primarily need social mobility that is immediate, short-term, and enables significant access to the financial system. What they do on their model, after conceding that there are structural barriers against the poor access to these systems, is you further disenfranchise them. Why? Because if I enter into a liberal arts degree, but my secondary education background is broken from a ghettoized area that does not necessarily give me access to the sort of social environment that the middle class have access to, I will not do any better. But more importantly, once I'm done with my liberal arts degree, I will probably not be as valuable as an individual who they've also conceded in description, who has a lot of money and a lot of connections insofar as getting jobs. So the question then becomes, what's the best way of enabling these individuals to achieve a significant amount of social mobility? And we tell you that it is through financial empowerment, through the reduction of emphasis on the sort of inflation of degrees within society. Because if I can get through a bachelor's degree, I probably won't be able to get through a master's degree. Because by that time, my personal finances would be significantly strained, and my ability to access the employment market would be near zero. Before moving on to what I have to bring this way, let's analyze a couple of things. Let's start first with Andre. So first, Andre says that, well, it is good for them to enter university because they can become investment bankers and therefore, well, do really well and repair that. And I think Nick's argument significantly engaged with this. If they were going to become successful investment bankers or successful lawyers who make a lot of money, why is it then that a bank will not have an incentive to give you a loan that you obviously would be capable of paying back? We don't think that successfully responded to that. Then he said that if you're qualified to enter university, then you're probably qualified to do well as well. Exactly. So if you're qualified to do well, once again that brings us to the same point. What then is the incentive or the lack of incentive of the private market to subsidize? And then he moved on to talking about how we need to empower disenfranchised groups because we're complicit in the process. The problem is that under some opposition's model, what we have is a state being complicit in the process. How? Because the state is putting you through a system that you are unable to relate to, that you're necessarily disenfranchised from, without resolving the root of the problem. The root of the problem being the absence of financial access, or the absence of financial mobility to be able to access resources of education. Because, let's face it, even if you subsidize tertiary education, there's still a significant amount of cost that is incurred that is associated with the process of studying itself, whether it's books, stationery, or even just being able to access the plethora of information or plethora of individuals. So their biggest idea was the fact that you need these individuals to socialize with the middle class. We thought that this sort of socialization and sociability could occur anywhere. It could occur by following a fan club, or a football club, etc., etc. We thought that this process of socialization can come a long way. Before moving on, please.
You do realise that tertiary education also covers vocational courses which allow people to get the on skills and the immediate ones that allow them to be electricians.
Yeah.
Well, we think that necessarily when it comes to issues like vocational education, there's a